Uhuru. This is Omali Yeshitela, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, the African Socialist International. I want to welcome everyone here because we think it's extremely important what has transpired with the release of Julian Assange, who had been locked up for something like 5 years in a prison in the United Kingdom, and prior to that had been more or less under house arrest at the Ecuadorian embassy in England. We think it's extremely important that he has been freed. As you know, I, along with two other members of our movement and party, have been indicted. And on September 3rd, we'll be going to prison, going to trial, and possibly to prison for 15 years. And this is based on issues of free speech, similar to what has happened with Assange. And that's obviously one of the reasons we will be extremely concerned about the freedom of Assange. This question of free speech is something that's roiling the waters throughout this country and throughout much of the world, where the colonial colonizers continue to dominate. So I just want to say some things about that. It was 2 days ago, on July 25th, before they allowed, through obviously a carefully organized, planned event to free Assange from prison in England, bring him from England to so-called U.S. territory in the Pacific Islands, which is another question that is extremely important for us for the purpose of this discussion, and near Australia, so that he would not have to come to the United States proper and go into a prison inside the United States. So that didn't occur. And so he was released and has now returned to Australia, which is where he lives, which is where his wife and family are located. There's been some concern initially about the fact that Assange, as a condition of a plea deal, had to plead guilty for violation of a 1917 Espionage Act. This Espionage Act was something that was created by the United States government with the advent of the Soviet Union, with the advent of the success of the revolution in Soviet, what has been characterized as Soviet Russia, which an event that itself was influenced by and became a part of the anti-colonial struggle. Anybody familiar with that era will recognize this is the same time frame within which we saw the Balfour Declaration out of England that turned Palestine over to European Jews. This was the same time frame that the Sykes-Picot initiative was launched that transformed what we now call the Middle East into all of the borders that we see there, more or less, were created by France and deal with France and England at that time. So it was a time of tremendous amount of struggle by colonized peoples around the world, and it has implications for everything that we're seeing now. And so 2017, the colonial powers were frantic. As I said, they were making these deals among themselves, splitting up the world among themselves, saying who was going to have what kind of power. And then in the United States, because of the success of the Russian Revolution that was aligned with and influenced by the struggle against colonialism. This, as you know, the first imperialist world war was something that was created was done in order to redivide the world among the colonial powers. And this is a war that also contributed to the success of the Russian Revolution, because the Russians under V.I. Lenin and the Bolsheviks had refused to participate in the struggle to redivide the world, and called on the colonial powers and all the people who lived within the colonial countries to unite with to turn this struggle, refused to participate in that war to redivide the world, and to create civil war where it was that they were located. Of course, none of them did that, and Lenin and the Bolsheviks succeeded in making that revolution. And again, that was something that came from the struggle of colonized peoples that opened up the door, that created the conditions for that, and also created the conditions and the anxiety among the colonizers so the United States would create this espionage law, this espionage act that placed all kinds of restrictions and draconian laws upon the people who live within the United States. And so that's the law that they accused Assange of having violated. He conspired, they said, to violate the espionage law, that he, as a consequence of giving information that showed how the United States was murdering people in Iraq, in Afghanistan. I mean, cold-blooded murder. This stuff was revealed, and he passed this on to Chelsea Manning, who they said was a part of the conspiracy as well. And so this is the basis of what had happened to him, and the fact that he was facing, he'd spent something like 5 years in a British prison, and something several years and more or less on the house arrest in Ecuador embassy. And he made this deal, this plea deal, after a period of time, and some civil libertarians were concerned about the implications of that. In fact, the hypocritical Washington Post, I think it was, just came out and decried the fact that he made the deal to plead guilty because of the implications that it has for free speech and freedom of press, which is what Assange and all of his supporters were talking about all along. And the lukewarm response that the Washington Post and the New York Times and the ruling class colonial media gave to that is remarkable. Compared to now, we have crocodile tears being shed based on the possibility that there are implications, precedents set. Because the fact of the matter is, the New York Times and the Washington Post, they did not get charged. And the New York Times and the Washington Post both published the information that Assange had released. So if Assange was guilty, so were they. But they didn't do that to the New York Times and the Washington Post. And so so now Assange is out, and he is returning. He has returned to Australia. And this is a really important thing. And we wanted from the Hands Off Uhuru coalition, that of which I am a part, from the forces who have been struggling to tell the state that they need to drop the charges against me and Penny Hess and Jesse Neville, who are part of the Uhuru movement. We united with the fact that Assange should be freed. And we were opposed to the fact that he was locked up. So was the Black is Back coalition that I chair, which is also a part of the Hands Off Uhuru coalition, which has grown into an anti-colonial movement for free speech. That's really important for us. So what happened to Assange had serious implications, we felt, for our case and for the question of free speech. And we've always stood for free speech. But we also noted that there's a difference in what happened with Assange and what happens with us, and what happened to the Panther 21, and what happened to all the Africans and other people who've been struggling around this question of free speech without a single murmur from many of the folk who now support Assange, even people who support Assange subsequent the attack on the Uhuru movement didn't make a single movement in our direction. And there's a reason for that. And I just want to say some things about that because we do support the fact that Assange was able to be free. But with the case of Assange, I think it's important to mention a couple of things. And one is that the issue of Assange was about getting one person out of prison. And even though it spoke to the question of First Amendment rights and free speech, it did so in a fact that the First Amendment and the free speech questions revolved essentially around Assange and the implication it may have for people like Assange. And I think that's extremely important. But I've noted the difference in how the case of Assange was treated And none of the people who were talking about freeing Assange says free Sundiata Acoli, free the members of the Black Liberation Army, Black Panther Party, who've been locked up for all these years. And a part of the reason for that is that it can be argued, I think convincingly, that the struggle to free Assange is something that improves the system of colonialism, improves the system, the rights of the colonizers, while the freeing Sundiata and freeing members of the Black Liberation Army and freeing Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru Three is something different, because the to what end is different. To what end is not just a matter of freeing political prisoners, but freeing political prisoners who imprison, or the attempt to colonize, to imprison us based on colonialism. Because colonialism cannot, with the resolution to what is happening, to what happened to the Black Panther Party, to Sundiata Acoli, to Assata, to Omali Yeshitela, to what happened to Geronimo Pratt. All these people cannot be resolved simply by saying, okay, we violated your right to free speech. The question is that there can be no meaningful freedom for us within the colonial system. And we're saying that we are opposed to colonialism. We're not just saying that we are talking about anything. We have organized and spoken in opposition to colonialism, to the domination of African people here in the United States, and to the domination of the peoples of the world. We have gone beyond that and said that we live within a global system that is characterized by parasitism. It is a colonial mode of production, that all of the activity happening in the world today is locked into a single global system that came into existence through the colonial slavery of African people that has embraced now beyond Africa and African people, but peoples in all the other colonial territories, in Indonesia, in Australia, where Assange has gone back to, in New Zealand, in Palestine. All of these people live under colonial domination. It's a colonial mode of production. All activity, not just of us who are oppressed, but for Assange. He lives within a colonial mode of production. The white people in Australia live within a colonial mode of production. And I wanted to say that's extremely important, because even as Assange gets an opportunity to go back to Australia, he's going back to an Australia that is a part of the process of developing the colonial mode of production, that the First Nation people there are catching hell every day, not just like Assange because he violated this relationship that exists between the colonizers and its ruling class, but the people, the First Nation people, are catching hell because the whole colonial, the whole capitalist and imperialist enterprise rests upon the foundation of our exploitation, our oppression, the theft of our land, the theft of our genius, the theft of our culture, etc. And Assange has gone back to that, but there's no freedom of speech for the First Nation people there, who are dying early deaths there, where they only represent something like 3% of the population, but more than 30% of the people who are imprisoned there, where something like 50% of the young people who commit suicide, and that's the 50% or more of the young people who die in the First Nation, among the First Nation who live in Australia, die through suicide. This is something about the conditions that they face on a regular basis, and nothing that allowed Assange to go out, but even addresses that question. And most of the people who claim to support Assange, I have not heard a single word about what is happening to the people there. So the point that I'm making is that we support Assange and the fact that he's out, but we recognize that Assange and his freedom resides on a pedestal of the oppression and exploitation of colonized people around the world, including those whose land was stolen, that allows Assange to live a relatively comfortable life in what they call Australia now at their expense. So we are saying that somebody made the point that the Assange supporters should make a pivot and come and support the Uhuru Three because this is supporting the struggle against colonialism, not only of colonialism as it relates to African people, but to Palestinians. The First Nation people in Australia come out thousands strong in support of the Palestinians. They should, the Australians, the colonizers there, the settlers there, should be uniting with the struggle of the First Nation people, and should be uniting in this process of overturning the colonial mode of production. Because what we've come to understand is the question of freedom and free speech and constitutional rights as it relates to this country and most of where the colonizers hold sway. The question of freedom, the question of free speech, the question of liberty is concentrated in the colonial issue. It's the colonized people. And, you know, I think about, and you've heard me say this on many different occasions, that Nat Turner in 1831 led a revolution, a movement against colonialism, colonial slavery in the United States, in the Tidewater area of Virginia. His slogan was strike at night and spare no one. And it was an attempt by enslaved African people to break out of this process. Haiti, all these other places where we see a revolutionary activity by African people occurred, but they captured, when they finally captured Nat Turner, they put him on trial. And they put him on trial, and he was found not guilty. But the fact, he was found guilty, rather. But if he had been found not guilty, he still would not have been free because he would have been colonized. And this is the dilemma that some people face, especially colonizers, especially settlers, especially white people who constitute a part of the colonizer enterprise. This is the dilemma. This is the reason why every time you see when in the 60s and now when we complain about the police doing this, doing that, the white people say, well, they must have done something because they have a different reality than what the colonized people have. And so what we are calling for is that all of those people who supported Assange, as we supported Assange, but we supported more than Assange. We supported the struggle, the liberation of the people of Palestine. We supported the struggle of the oppressed people who are being bombed and on a regular basis throughout the places like Iraq and Afghanistan. We support freedom and the lifting of the quarantine that they placed on Cuba. The struggles that they're making against the people in Venezuela, the whole colonial enterprise rotten to the core. We support the liberation of our people who are in the Sahel, etc. This is the colonial enterprise, and all of us have to support that and have to be able to see the struggle to free the Uhuru Three as a part of that struggle. It's not just some inert mass of people with our only interest being the free of political prisoners. We are facing political imprisonment because we are struggling against colonialism. We will not allow the fact that they want to put us in prison to detract us from that. The fact is, what we are calling on everybody, Assange supporters included, is to join us in this counteroffensive that we're waging against colonialism. It is the crisis of colonialism that has driven the United States to lock people up for even uttering words that says that they would send ships to the Mediterranean to kill people, that they would talk about arming this illegitimate white nationalist state called Israel, to murder not only Palestinians, but to murder people who are living in Lebanon and preparing to kill people in Yemen and other places around the world. It's colonialism. It's the colonial mode of production. That's the thing that has to go. And this is difficult for a lot of people to get because they cannot unite and recognize the fact that it is the centrality, the central question around all the lives of all the people is the colonial question. The Black people who are so despised, the Black people who are so looked down upon, the Mexicans and the other colonized people are critical. These are the primary forces upon which the freedom of speech and freedom, democracy. This is the force that will end all of this oppression and exploitation. And what has to happen is that white people have to break free from this ideological lock on their brains that will not allow them to join the mass of human beings because they've accepted this definition of being white and better and different from everybody else in the world. And that's colonialism. That's a colonial mentality. It has to go. And so we say we're happy to see Assange is out. We were happy to hear the statements coming from his wife, who recognized that that his imprisonment was a massive assault on the question of free speech. We recognize that as well, and we are hoping that his wife also recognized that the central to the question of freedom in Australia is what happened to the First Nation people. Central to the question of freedom and free speech, etc., in the world is what happened to colonized people, and certainly in the United States, where what kind of freedom and free speech is there on these concentration camps that they call Indian reservations, or in the barrios where our sisters and brothers, from the Mexican people and what they call the ghettos of this country, there is no free speech there, never has been. And so we are saying that we want the Assange supporters and Assange and all of those forces to unite with creating the real world of free speech, because this question is concentrated in the colonial question. So this is what I think is really important for us to understand. And also I think it's important because right now, with the U.S. and the way it's acting here inside this country and around the world, there's a lot of discussion happening now about fascism. We're moving toward fascism. And the fact of the matter is it's colonialism. And it's always been colonialism. And the fact is that this discussion about fascism, I remember being a younger person and experiencing this whole fight against fascism and the heroic French resistors, etc., fighting against German fascism. And I even remember the Communist Party USA helping people to go to Spain to fight against fascism in Spain, and Franco even created a Lincoln Brigade to do that. But there was no Lincoln Brigade dealing with the oppression of Black people here, and they even had African people left here, went with the Communist Party to fight in Spain. And what we're saying is that we are looking at a global system, and I'm happy to say that I was looking at some things coming from the First Nation people in Australia. They understand that. They understand that it's one struggle of colonized people all around the world. They understand that it's a single system based on colonialism that we are dealing with. They understand that. And the weak link in the struggle against imperialism, the struggle against capitalism, has always been the colonizers, the white people, who end up being on the wrong side of the question in too many instances. We look at France again. It was the fighting against fascism when it came to French people, and Europeans. But France was a colonial power. It dominated African people in places all over the continent of Africa, and especially when we look at northern Africa, and we look at where Fanon and other people were trying to overturn this relationship with the French. The French Communist parties was opposed to the liberation of people in Algeria. It was the French, while they were talking about fighting against fascism, that was killing people in Vietnamese in Vietnam. So the question is, colonial question is the dominant central question. You get rid of colonialism, you get rid of fascism, you get rid of the colonial mode of production, and that's our road to liberation. So we say, free Julian Assange, long live the freedom of Julian Assange. But the struggle to free people in Australia has to be one that's bigger than the struggle for this white man who lives actually, and at the expense of our people in Australia. So thank you so much. Remember, we're looking forward to seeing you in the St. Petersburg, Tampa Bay area. We got a trial coming up in the federal court in Tampa on September 3rd. We got a massive mobilization that will be happening in St. Petersburg, Florida on August 31st. We are asking on people who believe in free speech to join with us, because here is where the center of the struggle against free speech is located. Not just free speech as it relates to our case. In our case, as you know, it revolves around the fact that the United States claimed that we were working for Russia because we were talking about freedom for Black people. It claims that we were working for Russia because we were trying to create discord in the United States because we were getting signatures to say that Black people that the United States should have to answer to the United Nations for violation of the 1948 Convention on the crime and on punishment and crime of genocide. They want to put us in prison because they said I was working for the Russians when I went to Moscow in 2015. They don't say I was working for Russians when I was in Ireland when the British were oppressing the Irish in 1982 and 83. They don't say it was true when I was in Spain in 2007, making the same message to an international community that I took to Moscow, that I took to Ireland and all these other places to struggle for Black people and liberation. But they cannot come out and say that they're locking us up because of the free speech. So they contrive and come up with all these other espionage acts and all this other kind of stuff to smother people's imagination and consciousness of the fact that it's free speech. It's the liberation of us all, and central to the issue of freedom and democracy for peoples on the world is the colonial question. And so everybody who does not have a material stake in maintaining this nasty relationship that brutalizes and murders people all around the world, with what is happening in Palestine now being a glaring example of what it is that we are talking about. Everybody who wants to change this, everybody who feels like there is no alternative except for Trump or Biden, everybody who wants to see an alternative should join into this process, come and unite with us in the struggle against colonialism, and that will get rid of this entire, what appears to be this conundrum where people call it the lesser of two evils, when actually what you got is the evil of two lessers. So again, go to handsoffuhuru.org, handsoffuhuru, UHURU.org, and find out how you can participate in this movement that take this struggle beyond what is happening with Julian Assange, and take this struggle beyond what is happening to me, and make it possible to free all these Africans and others who've been locked up in these prisons, like some of the people from the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panther Party, who they would free just to die, just so the families would have a funeral. And to function as some kind of demoralization of our people. We're not demoralized, we're fighting like hell. And so we want to say, come again, anticipate coming to St. Petersburg, Florida for August 31st, and being at that trial in Tampa, Florida, which is right across the bridge, 20 minutes away, on September 3rd. So we look forward to seeing you, and thank you so much for coming on. All power to the people.